Ladies and gentlemen, teachers, students, boys and girls, as we celebrate Black History Month, it is our duty, your duty, to correct the past through action. Since the 1970s, that familiar declaration of Black History Month has introduced countless African American and historical achievements and celebration. But why is February designated as the month to commemorate African American history? Why? The answer lies with an eminent American historian, Carter G. Woodson, who pioneered the field of African American studies. In 1915, after Woodson attended a 3-week national celebration of the 50th anniversary of emancipation, he was inspired. And Woodson and 4 other founders of the Association for the Study of the Negro Life encouraged scholars to engage in the intensive study of the Black past, a subject that had long been sorely neglected by academia and the U.S. schools. Hence, in 1916, Woodson and his associates created the Journal of Negro History. And in 1924, spurred on by Woodson's college fraternity, Omega Psi Phi, introduced Negro History and Literature Week. And 2 years later, in February of 1926, launched the Negro History Week. February is the birth month of 2 figures who loom large in the Black past. U.S. President Abraham Lincoln, born February 12th, issued the Emancipation Proclamation. An African American abolitionist, author, and orator, Frederick Douglass, who was born on February 14th. Since the death of Lincoln and Douglass in 1865 and in 1895, respectively, the Black community has been celebrating their birthdays, their contribution to African American liberation and civil rights. Hence, the month of February became the root of Negro History Week, honoring the invaluable legacy of Lincoln and Douglass, celebrating Black history and the achievements of Black people in general. Civil rights activists known for their fight against social injustice and their lasting impact on the lives of all oppressed people included the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, Paul Robeson, Medgar Evers, Percy Julian, Barbara Jordan, Rosa Parks, Hank Aaron, Richard Loving, Stokely Carmichael, Dr. Maya Angelou, Harry Belafonte, Eller Baker, John Lewis, Jesse Jackson, John F. Kennedy, Nelson Mandela, Frederick Douglass, Pearl S. Buck, Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, Thurgood Marshall, A. Philip Randolph, James Meredith, and many more. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., leader of the Civil Rights Movement, played an essential part in Black history. Today marks the 59th anniversary of the March on Washington. The historic 1963 protest, led by Dr. King, in which 500,000 people marched to demand jobs and freedom for Americans of all racial backgrounds. Amid our present climate of hate, we are inevitably asked to consider how far we have come to realize the vision of justice and equality that King articulated a half a century ago. Though King has been memorialized in many places around the country and the world, his thinking, his lessons, and requests point to our thinking about what it means to promote racial justice. Many significant black civil rights historical figures and Jewish civil rights participants who came out of the civil rights movement have not received many accolades. For example, Daisy Bates was a renowned journalist, civil rights activist, mentor to the Little Rock Nine, and speaker at the March on Washington. She was the only woman permitted to speak at the Washington engagement. In the 1960s, black citizens made up 40% of the population of Mississippi, but fewer than 7% of black Mississippians were registered to vote compared to between 50 and 70% in other southern states. Fannie Lou Hamer, who exemplified leadership, fortitude, strength, was the co-founder of the Mississippian Freedom Democratic Party. During the summer of 1964 in Mississippi, she came to prominence and was the driving force that brought their civil rights action onto the national stage. Fannie Lou united the Students' Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Congress of Racial Equity, and the Council of Federated Organization to register Mississippians to vote. Through their combined efforts, the multiracial cast of over 700 volunteers from around the United States traveled to Mississippi to help black residents to register to vote. In the end, 17,000 black Mississippians attempted to register to vote, and only 1,200 were successful. The civil rights movement could not have been successful without our Jewish brothers and sisters. African Americans and Jewish people were similarly categorized as racial others. Jewish participation in the civil rights movement of the 1950s and the 1960s was overwhelming. The African American and the Jewish communities in the United States have had a long history. That's right, a very long history of cooperation. To the extent African American and Jewish people came into contact through the Atlantic slave trade during the 17th and the 18th century. The crux of that relationship has been ideological, as the two groups bonded as fellow minorities. For their part, African Americans sympathized and related to the historic or that history of the Jewish people facing oppression in both Egypt and in Europe. African American spirituals and slave songs such as Go Down Moses reflect these ties. And in the 1960s, the critical decade of the voter registration drives, as many as 90% of the civil rights lawyers in Mississippi were Jewish. Large numbers of them were recent graduates of Ivy League law schools. They worked around the clock analyzing welfare standards, the bail system, arrest procedures, and justice of the peace rulings. Racing from one southern town to another, they obtained parade permits and issued complaints on jail beatings and intimidation. Jews made up at least 30% of the white volunteers who rode freedom buses to the South, registering black people and picketed segregated establishments. They marched with Martin Luther King in Selma and in Birmingham. Many were arrested. Others were taken into custody for attempting to desegregate a swimming pool in St. Augustine, Florida. Rabbi Arthur Lewald, one of the demonstrators, was severely beaten in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Edward Scare, a young physician volunteering his medical services in support for the freedom marches in Mississippi, was attacked by the Ku Klux Klan and was almost killed. Rabbi Iris Saunders of Little Rock testified before the Arkansas Senate against pending segregationist bills. Rabbi Perry Newsombaum of Jackson, Mississippi, courageously lent his support to the integration effort, as did Rabbi Jacob Rothschild of Atlanta, Emmett Frank of Alexandria, and Charles Mantenbaum of Birmingham. Jews were the earliest supporters of the Urban League, founded in New York in 1911 to help newly arrived black migrants from the rural South. The International Ladies Garment Workers Union and the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union organized black people for union memberships. In the landmark 1954 Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court accepted the research of the black sociologist Kenneth Clark that segregation placed the stamp of inferiority on black children. The American Jewish Committee had commissioned Clark's study, and it appeared in the amicus curiae brief the committee submitted to the court. The Anti-Defamation League and the American Jewish Congress also submitted amicus curiae briefs on behalf of that cause. Once the judgment was issued, Jewish defense organizations continued to file legal briefs in civil rights cases dealing with housing, education, employment, and public accommodation. Many local and state desegregation regulations were drafted in the offices of Jewish agencies. During the Civil Rights Movement, Julius Rosenwald, chairman of Sears and Roebuck, contributed more generously on behalf of Southern black people than any other philanthropist. Edith Stern of New Orleans, whose Stern Family Fund in later years contributed vast sums to civil rights activities in the South. And in 1964, two young Jewish New Yorkers, Michael Schuerner and Andrew Goodman, and a black Mississippian, James Chaney, serving as voting registration volunteers in Meridian, Mississippi, were murdered by the Ku Klux Klan. The Klansmen then dumped their bodies in secret graves. Their murder shocked the nation and garnered national attention for the civil rights movement. A month later, President Johnson signed into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964, banning discrimination based on race, color, religion, national origin, and employment practices. As time went on, that act was a significant achievement for the African Americans and the Jewish communities. We are indeed grateful to the pioneers who laid the foundation for us and gave their lives for the cause. And today, we have a greater hope of making our world a better place to live and a more peaceful place to enjoy. Opened in 2016 as a part of the Smithsonian Institution, is the National Museum of African American History and Culture. It is located on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. It is the only museum in the United States dedicated to documenting African American life, African American history, and culture. During the rest of this Black History Month, they have offered several riveting educational events that parents, teachers, students, and everyone could participate in. With honor, respect, and reverence, we celebrate Black History Month. We ask you to please continue the legacy of tolerance, peace, respect for others, and justice for all. Thank you.